Welcome, everybody, to the Let Purple Rain podcast. Please like and subscribe. I'm your host, Joe Arpasi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. I started my CFF work in 2008, and after stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024 as Purple Rain. You can follow me on X at the handle you see on the screen, and you can find all of my content at letpurplerain.com. I want to welcome today's guest, Eliot Mays, otherwise known as Bacon Fueled, to a lot of you that are on X. He runs his own website, Bacon Fueled. You can find it at baconfueled.start.page. And you can also follow him on X at the handle that you see on the screen. Eliot, it's awesome having you on for the show today. For those of you out there listening that aren't familiar with Eliot's work, Eliot, could you go through your history in CFF and, the type of work that you've been doing in the industry or just your involvement on X for everybody?
Yeah, sure. First of all, just wanted to say happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. I'll do my best to fill in for Froton on this topic. When you sent me the show sheet originally, I saw Eric's name and got excited because I was, as I mentioned to you, I was planning on wearing a wig and downing a few pixie sticks to get my energy level up and come on and have a good time talking ball. Having said that, obviously we're effectively the same. I'm just the shorter, less charismatic, bald version of Froton.
Yeah, pretty simple.
But yeah, but I will, however, say that there's a nasty rumor going around that I may or may not have started, that Eric's notorious for skipping leg day. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to say that rumor is completely, utterly 110% true, and that I refuse to take shortcuts like that. So, Joe, you're definitely getting
shots fired.
Yeah, he's gonna call me out on it someday, bringing a squat rack to my house. But
yeah, I'm sure.
Definitely gonna give you
for all of you that aren't familiar with Eric Froton, Fantasy Points on YouTube. Their CFF All Access podcast. He'll probably be on there, and he'll probably be commenting on it next week. So, I don't think you'll have to wait long to hear an answer.
But yeah, so as far as kind of what I do, I mentioned on Chasing the Netty a couple weeks ago that basically I'm just scratching my own itch. I'm not really new to the college fantasy football world. I've been playing since 2006, but as far as like content is concerned, everything that I put together are things that I've done just to scratch my own itch and just for my own benefit. And now I'm just putting it kind of out so that other people can possibly use it and benefit from it too. So that's really about it. And I don't really have a schedule. I don't have a mission or a goal. I just, when I think of something that I want to look into, I analyze it, I look at it, and I put it out for anyone else to take a look at as well. I've got player rankings, schedule matrices, start sit tool. The last couple of years, I've really gotten into player props, and that's something that I plan to try and expand on this year as much as I can. But yeah, I just love college football. Born and raised in Nebraska. I'm a Cornhusker fan, but really I'll watch any game that's good.
That's the beauty of college fantasy football is that, you love watching, and back in the day, the old Conference USA or the WAC and like some of those games late at night, like you'll root for anyone. And some of my favorite games in the past was watching Conference USA teams like, Houston playing Tulsa, Rice back when they were good. Like that's something that, and even people I bring into the CFF space, that's part of what they love is they get excited about games they would not have cared about beforehand. You mentioned like the way that you kind of do your work. Yeah, you mentioned the way that you kind of do your work of, you scratch your own itch, things that you like working on, and I do a lot of the same too. So I mean, we're pretty similar in that mode. Like when I do special topics, especially this, CFF offensive systems. Yeah, so much of what I hang my hat on when I'm doing projections and rankings and everything really starts here, and that's why this is kind of the first of the draft central content that I'm putting together because it really is the bedrock and the foundation of what I do. So I take that same approach as well in the work that I do, and going into a couple of the announcements here for letpurplerain.com. We're in April. I'm continuing to provide news and fantasy stock report updates from spring camps around the country. That'll be running all the way through the end of the month, and I believe the last, right into the beginning of May would be the last stock report, and then I'm going to do kind of an injury recap article as well for everything that's been tracking in spring camp. I'm obviously continuing this 7-part CFF coaching systems series where we review the best offensive systems for a specific type of players. An example would be high volume tight ends, which will be the next show. There's tons of great guests on these podcasts, including Eliot, Mr. Baconfield here. Like I said, this is the bedrock of what I use for building up my my draft kit, and I think it'll be an invaluable tool for your drafts as well. You can find the entire series at letpurplerain.com, and in the link in the description, in the description below, you can find links to each and every article that I've been posting on it. I'm also extremely excited to bring you a special promotional event this year, this awesome 52-man challenge. Go ahead and check out this promotional video.
Do you love college football? Do you love fantasy football? My name is Joe Arpasi, and I have just the thing for you. I'm the man behind LetPurpleRain.com, your premier college fantasy football resource. And I'm hosting a 52-man college fantasy football league. New world order. The winner of my league is going to take home this custom championship belt provided by this league's sponsor, armchampionshipbelts.com. If you want a chance to compete for this bad boy, go to letpurplerain.com and sign up to be a premium subscriber today. All premium subscribers are automatically entered into the drawings to see who makes this league. And I'm going to be running drawings from March all the way through July. That means the longer that you're a premium subscriber, the more chances you have to be entered into this 52-man challenge. Let me tell you something, brother. Winning this belt's not going to be easy. You're going to have to contend with the new world order of college fantasy football. You're not only going to be competing against me, you're going to be competing against Eric Froton from NBC Sports and FantasyPoints.com, Jared Palmgren from Chasing the Natty Podcast and CampusToCanton.com, and John McKechnie from RotoWire.com. So go sign up today to become a premium subscriber at LetPurpleRain.com so you have a chance to get a golden ticket to the show. You're not going to want to miss out on a chance to win this baby because this belt is just too sweet.
I am so pumped to be hosting the 2025 Battle for the Belt 52-man league challenge. Special thanks again to Arm Championship Belts for being this event's sponsor. And I'm going to be doing the second of 6 golden ticket giveaways live here on YouTube next week on Wednesday, April 16th. If you aren't already a premium subscriber, sign up now so you'll automatically be entered into the golden ticket giveaways. The very last name that was drawn in the first golden ticket giveaway, Eliot, like your name popped up right before the last winner. I was like, oh, he just came up short. But, you know, like, yeah, I don't know if you caught that or not. If you watched,
I love the play.
You know, but and it's one of those, you know, everybody's name gets put in a random shuffle. Anyone who's already won does not get a second entry. And all of you guys that have been loyal premium subscribers here early in the season, obviously your odds are going to be better now than further along in the summer when we get more people coming back. So that's why I've been kind of spreading these out. I want to reward you guys that are loyal premium subscribers, but also I got to make sure I keep some openings for people that sign up late. Last announcement I want to make is go ahead and check out my CFF apparel shop. I have a link in the description below. I have short, long sleeve t-shirts, tons of color options, can koozies. There's not just things for Let Purple Rain, but there's also generic college fantasy football stuff. So go ahead and check it out, especially if you're looking for a good koozie to be drinking your beers while you draft. All right, moving into today's show, we're going to be reviewing the top CFF coaching systems for POWR3 receivers. YouTube will be the home of the preview show where we're going to review the number 11 through 15 coaching systems. LetPurpleRain.com is the exclusive home of the top 10 coaching systems. I'm sure many of you guys watching right now are thinking, what's a POWR3 receiver? POWR3 stands for Potent Offense WR3. This term was coined by Eric Froton when using the POWR3 drafting strategy. You're taking shots on players that you can get later in drafts with the hopes that they work their way up the depth chart into a wide receiver 2 or maybe even a wide receiver 1 role. You're targeting passing offenses that have good fantasy value outside of the wide receiver 1 position. POWR3 wide receivers are typically not the guys expected to be the wide receiver 1 or 2. Some of those players could be included if they're in murky position battles. I kind of take a gray area with that. And, you take on higher risk drafting these players, but you're drafting them very late. So you're not spending a high draft pick and spending high draft capital on these guys. For a coaching system to qualify for this show, the career average for a coach's wide receiver 2, this is one time I'm going into the 2, that wide receiver 2 must average 10 fantasy points per game, average 5 targets per game or 60 receptions over a 12-game season, and average 0.4 touchdowns a game or 5 touchdowns over a 12-game season. I also then take the combined fantasy points per game for both the wide receiver 2 and the wide receiver 1 from each coach, and I use those in the ranking process. As I've been mentioning throughout the series, I rank these coaching systems on a combination of those average career fantasy points scored and the amount of seasons that I have in my database. Coaches with more years of experience in my database get a bump up in the rankings. Guys that don't have as much get pushed down. And something that I mentioned as well in the target magnet receivers, though, the longer I've been doing these shows, the more I realize I might take a little more editorial discrepancy next year. There's some guys that I've been covering that the more I've been doing these episodes, I realize that the topic behind them might not be as good as some coaches that just missed the cut. I'm just not kind of making those edits at the last minute here this year. One great thing, though, for you guys is that in my draft guide, I'm going to have my complete listing of all coaches who made my criteria, not just the top 15. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's dive into some college fantasy football. We're going to kick things off here with our number 15 coaching system. We have Clay Helton, the head coach at Georgia Southern. Players to look at in the slot position are Dalen Cobb. Players to look at on the outside is LV Buckley Shelton, Camden Brown, transfer from Auburn, and Marcus Sanders. If we focus on Georgia Southern, not the USC history, Helton has been consistent with a slot wide receiver as his wide receiver 1 and an outside wide receiver as his wide receiver 2. This is the first episode. What you guys will notice on the screen, I'm giving you guys both the histories of the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2, since we're talking about players that could potentially hit into these areas. Before last year, Helton's wide receiver 1 at Georgia Southern has always hit 130 targets and 900 yards. Josh Dallas returns this year, and he should improve on those 2024 numbers. Last year, in my opinion, just seemed like a down year overall for the offense. Derwin Burgess has been the wide receiver 2 for the last 3 years. And looking at the target share, he's always hit 100 targets during those 3 seasons. What's not on the screen, and I will be commenting throughout the show, history for the wide receiver 3. I just can't fit it on the screen for all you guys. But Helton's wide receiver 3 has been all sorts of different wide receiver roles and pretty evenly. It makes me then think that he favors just talent over a specific wide receiver role for the wide receiver 3. One thing that's been missing for Helton at Georgia Southern is touchdowns and higher yards per reception. The quarterback, J.C. French, returns for a second year as a starter. Maybe now in his second year, he can finally ignite this offense and improve on those yards per reception and touchdowns. When looking at a potential wide receiver 3, I like to start with Dalen Cobb. He was the wide receiver 3 last year. He plays in the slot, and he would fit in as a wide receiver 1 if Dallas goes down with injury. The outside wide receiver options, LV Buckley Shelton, Camden Brown, Marcus Sanders will be competing for the number 2 spot. One thing that I don't have in the notes, but it's been coming up recently in news, is that Camden Brown's been making a big impact on there. And if I had to put money right now on a guy who's probably going to be the top outside receiver. It's looking like he could be the guy. The losers of this battle, they're probably out of fantasy relevancy, like, unless Cobb gets hurt. But, Cobb's he's stayed pretty healthy over the years. So the odds are, at the very least, he'll probably lock up that wide receiver 3 spot. Brown looks like he could probably be that wide receiver 2. Eliot, what names interest you the most out of this group and why?
Yeah, so with Georgia Southern, honestly, the main 2 names, obviously, that I would consider are Dallin Cobb and Josh Dallas. They're actually the only 2 that I currently have ranked in my rankings, and I don't have them ranked that far apart. I think that first I would need to see a lot more just efficiency from French to really get too excited about anyone else. I mean, last year he had a 17-11 touchdown to interception ratio. And that's just, it's surprising. Also his volume, I heard on your guys' last podcast with Jared, you guys were talking about the volume with Georgia Southern just going down as far as the total volume. And I think that has a lot to do with French and not anything other than that. So, yeah, but, knowing that we're getting him back and knowing that, he'll probably have some improvement. Those are the main 2 guys. I just don't expect to see him make leaps and bounds, jump ahead. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see, either Cobb or Dallas, who's 6'2", move out wide. They both should likely be rostered, I think. But, you're probably looking at drafting those guys in like round 22 to 24, 25, somewhere in there. I do believe we don't need to worry about Bunkley Shelton. I think I saw he was actually at their pro day recently, so he shouldn't be in the mix anymore. But you mentioned Camden Brown, Auburn transfer. I think he's probably the best bet. Wide as a power 3 option. 6'3", somewhere around 200 pounds. He didn't really do much at Auburn, but he was rated among the top 90 overall recruiting prospects in the state of Florida by many of the services out of high school. Played at St. Thomas Aquinas, but even his stats when he was in high school were okay. He, I think, is their best bet, but it doesn't excite me enough to really throw too many darts on him when there's other guys that I prefer.
I can agree with you about Cobb. Dallas is an established one, so he's not really, like a power 3 option. Cobb, I kind of agree with you. It's definitely worth taking a shot at, and especially if Dallas goes down, you have that potential that he could slide right in to a wide receiver 1 role. Brown does interest me, though. I've seen some clips of him in camp where, they're throwing jump balls at him, and he's using that big body. Coming down to Georgia Southern from Auburn is kind of that perfect transfer transition that we look at, guys from the higher power 4 coming down to the G5. And with touchdowns being so rare in this wide receiver core, if they're going to throw it down in the red zone, just having a guy that they can throw rebounds to, I'm not going to say he's going to be a touchdown vulture in the wide receiver room, but he has that potential. And that's something that does intrigue me a little bit. I want to keep seeing more news out of him. But right now, he's a guy that at the very least is intriguing me. I'd be willing to take a shot maybe as my last receiver on him, just because especially in early drafts, I like to kind of get a little bit of everybody. So I'm not going to ignore him there, but I don't know how high I'm going to be on him yet by the time my draft guide comes out.
No, agreed.
All right, let's switch over to our next coaching system. At number 14, we have Jason Eck, head coach at New Mexico. Players to look on the outside is Keegan Johnson, and in my notes I have in all caps, unknown. Players in kind of a balanced role that could play in the slot and outside, I have Michael Buckley and Sean Miller. We only have one season of stats here on Eck from Idaho. I say this all the time. These FCS guys, I do have a life. I don't want to drag 5 years of coaching data on them. So I can't tell you, is this a normal year? Is this a down year, an up year? I just always want to put that asterisk out there. But when trying to evaluate this one season, the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 3 at Idaho last year were outside receivers. Wide receiver 1, Jordan Dwyer, had a great fantasy season with 230 fantasy points, almost 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns. The wide receiver 2 spot was that balanced role and had a pretty decent 160 fantasy points, 961 yards, and 6 touchdowns. The wide receiver room is pretty barren here at New Mexico. The only wide receiver on the outside worth mentioning is Keegan Johnson. He looks to be a lock for that wide receiver 1, and that's why I kind of said unknown for the rest outside. I think Eck has to hit the spring portal to find more talent on the outside. I am bringing up Keegan because he kind of looks like the lock to be the wide receiver 1 here. We just don't have any other names to bring up, for outside receivers. There's only 2 players in that balanced role that I think are kind of worth mentioning. Michael Buckley has played in 12 games, but he only has 103 yards and no touchdowns on his career. Sean Miller has played in 18 career games, but he only has 1 reception. The situation seems pretty cut and dry to me when it comes to Power 3 options. I'm waiting to see what happens in the spring portal before I look at drafting any other wide receiver than Keegan. I'm kind of throwing him in here for this discussion just because we don't have a whole lot of experience. I think this is kind of pretty cut and dry because of all the unknowns. Do you have any different take on the situation, or do you agree with me that until we hear something else, it just seems like you draft Keegan Johnson like the wide receiver 1 or nobody else?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I think this is going to be a pretty rough year for the Lobos. I mean, it wouldn't shock me or surprise me to see like a 2, maybe 3 win season for them in their current state. They're essentially dead last in returning production on both sides of the ball. And I have to agree with you. Like, Ag will need to definitely hit the spring portal pretty hard to make things a little less painful even. And it's still not going to be great, but regarding what they currently have on their roster, I agree. Keegan Johnson's really kind of all they have, in my opinion, as far as fantasy perspective, as far as what's worth looking at. Considering they'll be playing from behind most of the year, I do expect to see a fairly frequent connection between Jack Lane and Keegan Johnson, though. So he is somebody who does interest me. But having said that, if Eck does land another receiver in the portal, which I would anticipate, I mean, he kind of has to, I would consider rostering him for sure, even though he's only averaged like a 44% pass rate over the last 3 years at Idaho. They've always seemed to have 2 receivers. If you look back 3 years at Idaho, they always seem to have 2 receivers that kind of pop off and would be considered fantasy relevant. But currently, yeah, I don't think there's a Power 3 possibility now, or even if he does bring in another.
If he brings in that other one, I'm going to look for someone who has played a mix of either they played balanced snaps, or maybe they're just kind of a taller slot receiver. That would be the only thing that would interest me looking at a Power 3 option. But right now, we just don't have that. But I wanted to throw it out there for everybody watching, something to keep an eye on here as the spring portal's going. Going over to our number 13 coaching system, we have Jedd Fisch, the head coach at Washington. Players to look at on the outside are Omar Evans, a transfer from Penn State, Rashid Williams. Players in the slot would be Kevin Green, and then a pair of true freshmen, Chris Lawson and Marcus Harris. First thing I do want to point out about Jedd Fisch's passing game is that an outside wide receiver has always been wide receiver 3. This has not broken trend. So let's all kind of keep that in mind as we move forward here. I see 2 ways to use the Power 3 model with Jedd Fisch's offense. The top thing to do is to go after the slot receiver in a year where the starter doesn't return, and that's what we have this offseason. The player who wins this position battle will end up as either wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. From 2021 through 2024, the slot receiver has been the wide receiver 1 every season but once, and that was with Tet McMillan, where he took the wide receiver 1 role over at Arizona. He was just super talented, where the talent, in my opinion, broke the trend for the wide receiver role. It looks very likely to me that Kevin Green's going to be the guy in the slot position in 2025. He does have some experience. He looks like a guy who could step into that starting role and be able to handle that pretty easily. His next best competition on the roster right now are true freshmen that I mentioned, Chris Lawson and Marcus Harris. Lawson is playing in the spring. Originally, I wasn't sure if either of these guys were early enrollees, but Lawson has been playing in the spring, and I have been reading some reports that he's playing good so far. So I don't know if he can mount enough of a push with Green. But unless, he really steps it up, the safe bet is to say that, uh, you know, Green probably has the slot receiver position locked in. He may not count as a power three since he could end up being that wide receiver one, but I want to include him just because we know Denzel Boston, we kind of have a more definite role of who could be wide receiver one or two. So I do think there's still some play with Green. So I wanted to bring him up in the discussion. Looking at targeting the outside receivers, that's definitely a power three move here. Boston, like I mentioned, is clear starter on one outside. He's going to take one of those top two wide receiver spots in the offense. Going after the other one, I think it's basically just locking up the wide receiver three at worst. Fisch is wide receiver three. They've only cracked 100 fantasy points once since 2022. So trying to go after Omar Evans or Rashad Williams, I think the best that you might get is Boston gets hurt, misses extended time, and one of these other outside receivers gets elevated up to the wide receiver two role. I do think Evans and Williams, that they're going to have a tough fight for this spot. I don't think this one's locked in for Evans. Rashad Williams is a pretty good receiver. So, you know, with that said, there's uncertainty there and a low ceiling for that wide receiver three. Do you see a different approach to drafting a power three candidate from the Washington offense, Eliot?
Not really. I'm not really seeing much drafting going on outside of Boston and then Green towards the back end of drafts. I think that Washington's main concern is, their main concerns are up front. Either they're only returning 47% of their offensive line, which ranks like 90th overall. Having said that, they do have a pass heavy offense, decent amount of pass success rate of like 48, 49%. Along with a young QB and Damon Williams, that obviously had a hell of a finish at the end of last year against some, solid defenses in Louisville and Oregon. I don't think, though, if I had to take a shot on anyone after Boston and Green, it would probably be Evans. But like you said, I don't believe there's much of a gap between him and Rashad Williams, however. So I think, the likelihood of both of them getting, approximately equal playing time kind of bastardizes any opportunity for a power three option here.
Yeah, and what you mentioned the O-line. One good thing with Damon Williams, and we saw it in the bowl game, he can escape pressure.
Yeah. Yep.
So one thing that I think will definitely help with any receiver is if they're just really good at scramble drill, they're able to make a good connection with Demond where, they just have that, he's sprinting out, running to the sideline, and they just kind of, there's a guy who naturally, they just click on those sort of plays. I'm not willing to take a shot on Evans or Rashad Williams yet, just because I think that battle's too tight. And even if we know a true starter, I'll be honest, I don't think I'd draft the wide receiver three from this offense. Hunter last year was one of those guys that we weren't sure. Could he be a wide receiver one, wide receiver three? And for me, I just sat there and said, well, I'm just going to skip him because I think Boston's going to be better and he's probably going to be locked into that wide receiver three, and there's just a really low ceiling. So, for me, I would say that Green seems to be the option here, and he's a quasi power three play. I mean, like I said, I don't think he's a true power three play, but for me, outside of Boston, that's just really the way I'm approaching things draft wise. To me, it's Boston, Green, and really nobody else, unless we see that race starts getting really tight at the slot position, and and Lawson really starts stepping it up. Anything else you want to throw out there for this situation?
No, you mentioned Hunter, and I think that probably has left a bad taste in my mouth as well, because I was kind of preaching his I don't want to say downfall, but the first few weeks of the year last year, his player props were way too elevated and based on his previous performance at Cal, and so it was fortunate that we were able to capture that, but obviously unfortunate for him that he wasn't able to kind of recapture some of his performance at Washington.
Speaking of Washington, our number 12 system is their former head coach, Mr. Kalen DeBoer, the head coach now at Alabama. Players to look at in the slot are Cole Adams and Lotsier Brooks. Players in kind of a balanced role would be Jeremy Bernard and Isaiah Horton. Kalen DeBoer's offensive system has adapted over time to the type of players that he has on his teams. When looking over his wide receiver history, I see a clear difference with trends between the Fresno State and Indiana years compared to the Alabama and Washington years. If we just focus on the Alabama and Washington years, here's a breakdown of how each wide receiver role fares. For the outside wide receiver, it's been the wide receiver 1 twice, wide receiver 2 once. For the slot receiver, it's been wide receiver 1 once, wide receiver 3 twice. And then the balance position has been wide receiver 2 twice, wide receiver 3 once. We know that Ryan Williams will command the wide receiver 1 spot, and he's going to be playing on the outside. So that basically is kind of leaving us then looking at the slots and the balanced roles, which I mentioned before. The balanced role has a little edge over the slot role for the wide receiver 2. The wide receiver 2 in DeBoer's offenses from 2022 to 2024, they have an average of 180 fantasy points, 97 targets, a little over 1,000 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Those numbers are dragged down hard by Jeremy Bernard's performance last season. The offense really became more run-oriented. The passing game was more limited under Jalen Milroe. And, I think that really kept a lot of the passing numbers down for all their receivers last year. Bernard is back as a returning starter. But I earlier mentioned Isaiah Horton, the transfer from Miami. Horton has played on the outside before coming to Bama, but I've seen mentions and comments from the coaches here in the spring that he'll likely split time between playing on the outside and the slot. This is exactly why I'm classifying him as a balanced player, even though his history calls for him to be an outside receiver. I think it's too early to tell if both Bernard and Horton are going to be on the field together or not. I think we're going to have to kind of see where that goes. So there's a big wild card there with how they're going to use Horton. Outside of Jalen McMillan's 2022 performance, the slot receiver has pretty much been coming up as a wide receiver 3. I mentioned before, Isaiah Horton could be taking snaps at that position. Cole Adams is the most veteran slot receiver on the roster. But true freshman Lotsier Brooks has been making waves in spring camp. Some in the media have said it will be impossible to keep him off the field. There's a lot of directions someone could take with these wide receiver names. How is someone going to play, who's going to be in that balanced position? Who's going to be in that slot? Are they just going to be shuffling a bunch of guys around? It's really too early to tell, but we're kind of starting to know who are the names and the possibilities of how it could all shake out. Eliot, what's your take on the best POWR3 option here at Alabama? And have you taken any shots on anyone outside of Ryan Williams in your fantasy drafts?
Yeah, so this is definitely one of the groups that, I'd be happy to take a stab at in drafts. I feel like they've got, just in general, a top 5 probably wide receiver core for sure. I think the thing that I'm looking forward to simply a stronger passing attack, with Milroe off obviously to the NFL and Grubb, rejoining DeBoer. I do expect their passing rate to increase this year. It was like 46, 47 somewhere, and it was under 50%. It should be well over 50% this year, I think. Obviously Williams is the guy that you want on your team, but Bernard and Horton are guys that I've been willing to take shots at in this draft year, especially Bernard. He's not quite as dynamic, obviously, as Williams, but he was a bit kind of like of a Swiss Army knife, and can kind of line up anywhere. And from my perspective, I don't feel like he really underperformed quite as much as people think, considering, he had, in the regular season, he had more receptions on 12 less targets than Williams, and was, extremely consistent, at least from a fantasy perspective, on a week-to-week basis, which is something that I value pretty highly on my receivers. I think Horton has been the one, kind of one of those guys that's been a consistent late-round grab for me, though. He had a 71% catch rate at Miami, coupled with a 6'4" frame. And I think that, he immediately becomes kind of an asset in the passing game.
Mm-hmm.
So he's also, like you mentioned, I've been listening to some spring reports. Obviously, I missed one, but, he's been getting some accolades from the coaching on his blocking abilities as well, which, obviously we don't earn points for blocking, but it does indicate that they're going to, want him on the field quite a bit.
With DeBoer's staff, they value that for the guys that they want to put out. Like, that's the best way to earn playing time, is the guys that bust their butts in the blocking game.
Yeah. And that should be the case for any, offensive coordinator. Honestly, it's way, way overlooked from a receiver perspective. But, the one that I did miss that you just mentioned was, I'm a little surprised to see him mentioned as a slot option. Considering I think he was pretty much exclusively used wide at Miami. But regardless, in either role, I think he's definitely a power 3 option this year, and somebody that I've taken shots at.
Yeah, Horton I think is a wild card. He's someone that definitely interests me for a power 3 option, just because, like you mentioned, Jeremy Bernard is a Swiss Army knife. They can kind of move him around, but it sounds like they might be using Horton that way as well. And then, so Horton can be on the outside at times, where if they're going to, defenses are going to focus on the other side of the field on Ryan Williams, maybe the deep shots can get open with Horton to use his big frame. They can move him inside as well. I think that the difficult thing is just, like we don't have 2 outside receivers that are in the top 3 in terms of the roles with this history. So we know Ryan Williams is taking one of those. Typically, that balanced wide receiver role is a guy who will flex out and take some of the other reps outside. And I just don't know yet how that's going to play out between Bernard and Horton. I kind of agree with you. Like the safe bet would be Bernard. I do like him as well as a power 3 option, just depending on what that price is in drafts. But Horton's the one who intrigues me the most. But because of the question marks, I'll probably want to watch the spring game to really see where they're moving him around and how they're using him. But like for me, because of the question marks, I'd probably wait till really late in the draft to take a shot at Horton, because he could be wide receiver 3 or 4, or he could be wide receiver 2 on this list, and that's exactly what this power 3 strategy is all about. So I do think there's quite a bit of risk with him. So I would probably want to wait till him being one of my last 2 receivers.
Yeah, and he's somebody that, like, I've been waiting probably till the last 3 rounds. Having said that, I'm probably the one driving up Jeremy Bernard's ADP.
All right, I'm going to switch over to the last system we're going to review on the preview show here. At number 11, we have Sonny Dykes, a head coach at TCU. Players to look at in the slot are Jordan Bailey and Major Everhart. Players to look on the outside are Braylon James, Jordan Dwyer, transfer from Idaho, who we mentioned earlier in the show, and Joseph Manjack, transfer from Houston. Just like Kalen DeBoer, Sonny Dykes has a clear change in his wide receiver role habits over time. This also has to do with which coordinators have been working underneath him. I feel like going back and looking at the consistency through 2021, the outside wide receiver position has dominated this time frame. It's been the wide receiver 1 4 times, and then the wide receiver 2 and 3 once for each of those. Eric McAllister, we talked about on the Target Magnet show. He looks poised to break out as a top wide receiver this season. So to make a power 3 play on an outside wide receiver, you'd be betting against McAllister if he remains healthy, in my opinion. Braylon James has played in 12 career games with just 4 receptions, 23 yards, and 0 touchdowns. Not much. Jordan Dwyer transfers in from Idaho. Last year, he had 78 receptions, almost 1,200 yards, and 12 touchdowns. What I like, besides that production, is he also has 28 career game appearances under his belt. Joseph Manjack he's had one good season, which was in 2023, but in my opinion, he's been underwhelming in all the others. He does have 36 career game appearances under his belt. in my opinion, that means it's kind of now or never for him to do something. The safest play I think you can make is a slot position for a POWR3 move. And on the screen, you can see, that the slot lands as wide receiver 2 in 3 of the last 4 years. And during that time, it's averaged 120 fantasy points. The slot has also been the wide receiver 3 in 3 of the last 4 years, averaging 95 fantasy points. There's a higher chance, I think, of landing a wide receiver 2 in the slot. But unfortunately, when I mention those fantasy point totals, that ceiling is pretty low. This position battle is wide open with inexperienced players contending for the job. Major Everhart, I think, has a slight advantage from a statistical performance. He has 14 career game appearances, 21 receptions, 201 yards, 0 touchdowns. He is dealing with an undisclosed injury, keeping him limited in spring practice. Jordan Bailey is right at Everhart's talent level, in my opinion. 16 career game experiences, 14 receptions, 155 yards, 0 touchdowns. He also has an undisclosed injury, keeping him limited in spring camp. Eliot, are you willing to take a chance on one of these TCU wide receivers? And if so, how late in the draft would you take that chance on him?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think, obviously McAllister is as good of a top tier lock as any wide receiver. And I think, he typically comes off the board in like the second or third round, if that. Beyond that, I'm certainly intrigued. TCU is ranked 17th offensively in SP plus. They have a decent offensive returning production of 64%. It also helps that they're obviously playing in a conference that simply isn't well known, let's say, for their defense.
Yeah.
But what I've read from spring practice reports, as well as a couple TCU oriented podcasts, Manjack might be operating out of the slot right now.
Really?
And as it stands, it appears that McAllister and Dwyer are expected to play the wide role, and Manjack round out the starting lineup in the slot. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if that doesn't happen, though, once everyone's healthy. But I personally would expect Jordan Bailey at the very least to get mixed in if he's not taking over that starting role once he's healthy. But I also heard a decent amount of chatter, and this is just somebody I'm excited about to see in college now, but an incoming freshman, Ed Small. It wouldn't shock me if he gets a little bit involved in the offense this year as well. Small's actually out of Anderson High School here in Austin, where I live, and he's put up just monster numbers. He put up over 1,100 yards in each of his last 3 years in high school. So he's somebody that I'm excited to see, hopefully on the field this year, but also in the future. But the only two that I've really taken shots on are McAllister and Dwyer. And that's simply because I've never, like you mentioned, I've never really been hyper impressed with Manjack. I'm sure he'll be proficient, but it's not enough to, I likely won't be drafting him.
I feel like the approach I probably would take, I'm like you, Manjack doesn't impress me very much. I can definitely see why they would move him to the slot, considering that we've got, Everhart, Bailey, both inexperienced, both dinged up. To me, that does make some sense. For me, if I was going to take a shot at someone, I would take a shot at the slot, just hoping to hit the wide receiver 2. One thing as well, we don't know really how it's going to play out, but there's a ton of targets that are open now this year. Besh, who was a tight end, but basically playing a slot receiver. With him gone, we don't know really where those inside pass attempts are going to go. I don't think they have another tight end as talented to command as high of a workload. So to me, I anticipate that slot position is going to have to get at least 15 more targets this year. But I want to look for someone who's kind of dynamic, someone who can make plays if I'm going to go after that slot receiver position. And, I don't picture Manjack as a guy who can make something happen with the ball in his hands. I view him as a steady Eddie at best. So, what sucks is Everhart and Bailey, look like, okay, those might be the guys that you want to look at. We just can't get any read on them in the spring with them being limited. So I don't know if I'll take any shots on these slot receivers until maybe fall camp and we start getting news there. Because I think it's a big risk. Like I would skip over Manjack, and Manjack very well could start the year in the slot. So like I do think it's a huge risk betting on Everhart or Bailey right now. But those would be the guys I would probably favor if I can start getting some news that they're really starting to step up and they might have a chance of earning that. But I think it's a tough bet for me going after anyone outside of McAllister. Anything else that you want to kind of throw in here before we wrap up the preview show?
Nope. All good.
All right. I want to thank everybody for watching the CFF Coaching Systems POWR3 Wide Receiver Preview Show here on the Let Purple Rain podcast. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. This is the 6th of a 7-part series on CFF Coaching Systems. I say it every episode. I think it's going to be an invaluable tool for your fantasy drafts. You can find the entire series at letpurplerain.com, and I have links in the description below for each and every article in that series. I'm going to continue having, I got one more great guest lined up for the tight end episode. I want to thank today's great guest here, Eliot Mays, otherwise known as Bacon Fueled. You can find his work at his own website, Bacon Fueled. That can be found at baconfueled.start.page. And I also would recommend follow him on X on the handle that you see on the screen. Eliot, go ahead and tell everyone what you have planned here for the rest of April and into 2025 that you know of, because you did mention you don't really have a content schedule like I do, but just any things that you kind of know you're going to be dipping your toes in.
Yeah, I mean, I've got obviously best ball drafts, which is something that I know you and I both are kind of pretty heavily involved in. I'll be continuing to do those. I mean, at any given time, I probably have 3 going on at once. As a matter of fact, I'm sure it's my turn to pick for the Champion Series draft right now. We're doing our 3rd one, and I'm probably getting yelled at for not making a pick, but
this show's more important. This show's more important, guys.
Exactly. Let's get our priorities straight here, fellas. But yeah, so best ball drafts. I'm working on updating a projection tool for, well, not a projection tool, a player prop tool to basically, the one I currently have brings in player props and updates them on a regular basis from prizepicks.com. And I'm working on updating it so that it can also bring in player props and odds from Underdog. So that's honestly a really big one that I'm trying to work on right now. And then I also am going to probably over the next few months dig really deep into schedules. As the summer months kind of become a little bit slow from a player news perspective, that's where I'm going to probably shift my perspective to and start really, kind of looking at schedules and seeing how each team, might play into the fantasy decisions that we make. And as I do that, I'll obviously publish those on Twitter as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the fantasy drafts. I know I'm going to be winding down mine for a while. I'm hosting an April mock draft that I'll be doing a podcast episode for. But like for myself, I'm going to be, and really kind of throwing out there also to the audience, I'm from the last week of April through May, I will be on the road for about half of May and that last week of April. The stuff I'm going to be doing, I'm not going to have time to do a lot of fantasy work, so I'm not going to be doing too many drafts. I'm going to be really focusing on pumping out content and keeping a steady thing of content, but also trying to get into projections. So like when June hits and we're really kind of looking into draft season hard, on my schedule, and this is why I'm bringing it up, is I'm going to be putting out scheduling content at the start of June. So it's like I'm really going to be doing a lot of kind of getting ahead right now and then getting caught up at the end of May for a lot of stuff. So I know like I won't be out there as much in mock drafts because I'm going to be focusing on keeping content coming for you guys here. And I want to thank all of you guys that are watching right now on the Let Purple Rain podcast on YouTube and everyone that reads at letpurplerain.com. You guys are the reason I keep doing this work, and your support is really what allows me to keep going, guys. I want to send a special thank you to one of the new premium subscribers, Chris Furby. He took advantage of my 30% discount on annual premium subscriptions. Chris, just like anyone that signs up to be a premium subscriber, will automatically be entered into the drawings for the Battle for the Belt 52-man league challenge, as well as getting this amazing content that I mentioned that I've got coming up for you guys. I'm going to be on the road and not able to work, but I'm still going to be pumping out content for you guys. That's how much you mean to me. Once again, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed this video, check out the rest of my fantasy draft prep videos. I'll have a pop-up on the screen at the very end of this video that you can click to, and it'll take you to that playlist. Thanks for joining the Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF reign starts here.